Jonathan. Thank you very much for joining me today. As you probably heard me say a couple of times, my name is Steve Ward. I'm going to be your host for today's session. We're going to be talking about the changes underneath PCI DSS 4.0 related to eSkimming and data privacy risk protection. Actually, some pretty interesting nuances for those of you here in the higher education space. We'll delve into a little bit of that. Try and answer as many questions as you might have. So if you have questions throughout the session, just fire away, and I'll try and make sure we get to all of them before we end. Probably get done a little bit before the scheduled time, maybe 35, 40 minutes from now, get you back into your day. But I can always be followed up with if we don't get your question answered. I'll try and keep that kind of brief at the back end, just to make sure you get a little bit of time back in your schedule. A couple housekeeping items. We are recording the session, and we will make the recording available post the webinar. Probably take about 24 hours before we can share that with you, but we will send it your way, and you can feel free, obviously, to share that with anybody on your end of the equation. And yeah, so let's dive in. So it is a time to talk just a little bit about source defense, so you know who we are, understand where we come from, and the space that we're in, and why we're able to talk to you about these controls and these protections that are required now under 4.0. Source defense, we created our company to stop what is referred to as eSkimming or mage card or digital skimming or credential harvesting, to stop the threat of attacks against websites where data is being stolen at the point of input. For many of us that have been around PCI for a long, long time, or in security for a long time, we may be familiar or should be familiar with the concept of protecting data in transit, protecting data at rest, right? So as it's going across the network or as it's on the back end inside your systems. But the threat really has moved and morphed to really trying to capture data at the point of input. And I'll explain what that means as we get a little bit deeper. But just know that's who we are. We're the eSkimming security company. Been around for quite some time now. Do a lot of work across a lot of industries, inclusive of higher education, definitely in the merchant space, the retail, e-commerce world, in financial services and hospitality, et cetera, et cetera. You could say that we, protect 20 billion in annual revenues. It's referred to here as e-commerce sales, but I think it's probably maybe a little bit too narrow of a definer. 20 billion in online revenues is what we protect. And in addition to that, we're stopping roughly 8 billion security and privacy violations every year. And I really want to emphasize as we get in a little bit about the privacy conversation, especially given your space, your unique space, and the type of data you collect and the type of interactions that you have with those that you work with. So we'll talk a little bit about that. It's a little outside of the PCI use case, but I want to make sure it hammers home as well. So let's talk about the PCI use case, right? PCI use case, PCI DSS 4.0, which effectively is now in place. I think you might have, a couple more days, and 3.2.1 is completely gone and in the rearview mirror. If I'm not mistaken, that's like maybe the 25th, I think, if not already had happened. But it's this month. 3.2.1 disappears, 4.0 rules to land. And one of the major changes, there's 50 changes in PCI DSS 4.0, but one of the major changes is for the first time, it really drives into scope the online transaction or the e-commerce transaction, or however you might look at it in your world, right? Bookstore sales or ticketing or donations or tuition collection, room and board, whatever you're collecting money from. If you're doing it online, PCI DSS 4.0 now says you got to take a look, and you got to look and make sure you're protecting against this eSkimming threat. And so let's talk a little bit about what that eSkimming threat is, where it manifests from, how it came to be. The issue relates to JavaScript. Okay, JavaScript is basically the code that rules it all, right? Like the everything, everywhere, all at once type of code, right? The client side threat or the eSkimming threat specifically starts with JavaScript, and security around this threat starts with something that hasn't been done and is really kind of novel to this point in time, is the control and management and security of the JavaScript that runs on your websites, whether that be first-party code that your own developers have written and you manage and you've created and have full view into, or increasingly, this expansion to this third party, fourth party ecosystem of code, where, you've got basically supply chain partners whose scripts are not managed, are not controlled, you don't have visibility into, you cannot vet. The issue is that JavaScript can perform any action and behave in any way that it wants on any site that it's running. And that happens to be 97% of the world's websites, maybe even a little higher than that. And there's no native security controls. So JavaScript can read, it can write, it can do whatever it wants, right? Once it's there and it's running from your website, loaded from your servers or called in by these third parties, into the client browser, into, every single student or alumni or donor or fan that might be coming and buying things from, any of your various different outlets as an institute of higher learning. And so it's a pervasive problem, one that touches probably every part of your ecosystem. And again, I mentioned a couple times, eSkimming is what PCI calls it. MageCart's another brand name for these types of attacks, but they take other things like form jacking, click jacking, credential harvesting, cross-site scripting, things of that nature, all basically synonymous with this type of attack. And so when we look at what is this stuff, right? This JavaScript, why is it there? All legitimate purposes. The broadening of the ecosystem of partners has taken place over the last handful of years. It's only going to continue. We've got some empirical research from a year ago, and compared to some recent stuff that we've looked at, we've already seen like an 18% increase in the average number of scripts running on site. But it's things like analytics and development tools, and it's things like social tools, right? Facebook and Twitter and Insta and all those types of things. It's chat, right? Support services and systems that you offer, to make the online experience, more enriched or to make it easier. It's things that you need legitimately to drive the business component of the website. That's why you've got it in there. It's touching 1.5 billion websites across the globe. Everybody's using it, so you're not outside of the realm of normalcy in terms of calling all this stuff in. And 95%, I mentioned, of websites are using JavaScript, and increasingly, like the majority of that JavaScript is third parties. Roughly 82% of code and actions that are running on the normal website now are not first party code. This is the third party, fourth party network that really exposes this problem. Verizon has said in its last DBIR that 18% of all breaches involved this eSkimming side of things, at least in the e-commerce world. So it's a pervasive problem. And it's what JavaScript can do that really makes it so dangerous, right? What's outlined here is actually some native behaviors of JavaScript, things that we see by design from some of these scripts that are running, most likely on your website or websites. That is like just the capability of JavaScript, that there are some legitimate business reasons that you might want things to be happening like this, but that also like almost like by design are like reaching into the world of malware. These are capabilities that adversaries want, that they, in a lot of cases, need to have some expertise to develop. But given the design of these solutions that are running, or these services that are running on your website, it's almost done for them. So natively, we see JavaScript that can change page content, right? Where it'll load things based upon user browsing experience, based upon geography, based upon what's happening at a click level. Keystrokes are being recorded, right? And that's key logging is a bad thing, but it's actually being done by design natively on some of this script. Add content, put images in, put text, put video, add form fields. These are all things that can happen, like that your partner may be doing because it's just helping enrich the website experience, tracking website behavior, user behavior, capturing data and pushing data over to your systems or feeding it back into analytics systems, redirecting users, right, to different parts of the website. But then you take the notion of a compromise into account, and this notion of like shadow script being run on the website. all those same things that might be allowable or that you might think are important based on whatever business need you defined are available, at a pretty low threshold, low barrier of entry to an adversary. So, I can change page content. I can redirect users to places they think are legitimate, but are actually under my control, where I can capture PII, where I can capture credit card data. I can record keystrokes. That can be credentials information. That can be that credit card data. That can be any number of things that I might be able to utilize for ill-gotten gain. I can track website behavior. I can lay in wait. I can figure out who I value targets are. I can run secondary or tertiary attacks at them. Capturing and exfiltrating data. Obviously, what I'm after when I'm stealing PCI data or credit card information, right, or PII, redirecting visitors to websites under my control. That's a really, really important one. That and the addition of form fields that don't exist, that weren't designed to exist, is what we see a lot in some of these attacks. And it's really why, there's got to be some form of control to ensure that, the trusted user interaction doesn't lead to an element of distrust and to a breach, because the adversary is, used the JavaScript running on the site to direct people in that way. I mentioned that I would want to talk a little bit, given your special, use case and your special sort of like, vertical that you're in, if you want to call it that, around data leakage and data privacy, because I think this is something that's really important for you guys to know as well. So there have been a number of cases, many of which have led to litigation, and some of which are leading to further changes to compliance requirements, not just inside PCI but outside, like GDPR and HIPAA and some others, where leakage is occurring, or the sharing of information with these third parties that is privacy protected. There's a Wired article talking about the fact that the top 100,000 websites in the world effectively were running keyloggers, covertly snagging everything you type into a form. You think about some of the capabilities, in that regard, and some of the capabilities of, the ad networks and things like Meta, where, the inappropriate deployment of Meta inside, say, I don't know, one of your, forums or your web pages where you're capturing sensitive information related to financial data, FAFSA, related to healthcare information, if you run a hospital network, related to whatever you might imagine, right? Those types of things that are like controlled by either HIPAA or FFIEC or GDPR. These things are actually being like siphoned, inadvertently, or by design, I guess I should say, but unbeknownst to the website owner, to these third parties, and jeopardizing the overall data privacy compliance, not just the PCI compliance. So it's important to understand that we've got to run these services. We've got to have them on our websites. We need them for the capabilities that enrich the client experience, the user experience, but we got to control them as well. And that's really what, Visa is sort of sounding alarm bells on, that really led to PCI, the PCI Council making a change. They're saying this is happening. It's happening more and more. This has become the primary attack vector. These third-party code integrations are what's targeted. Most commonly utilized tactics by threat adversaries is to conduct these digital skimming attacks. This supply chain is really what's exposing you. 75% of fraud and data breaches that they were looking at last year involved the e-commerce channel. You got to do something about it, right? And we got to make this thing in scope. Even just as early as, I think this was about a month ago, there was an alarm bell sounded by Europol. They found like 443 European major retailers compromised in this way. It's happening. It's happening every day. This is a real threat. We got to do something about it. We've got some research that you can avail yourself of. A number of white papers we'll throw up in the chat window, I think, before this is over. We did a piece looking at 5,000 of the world's largest websites a little while ago, about a year and a half, maybe at this point in time. We're refreshing all of that, but this is still very, very important. We're refreshing this with a new report that'll come out here in the next couple of months. But this gives you a good benchmark. Really exposes what's going on. So that's something you might want to read, in addition to a lot of the PCI resources that we have out there, that are both text-based, white papers, blogs, case studies, things of that nature, as well as video-based. Had a webinar a few weeks back with a really, really prestigious group of leaders in the PCI space, folks that they have dubbed the PCI Dream Team. Great webinar exposing the whole conversation about what you got to do, why you should do something, how you should approach it, etc. So, just a little thing to say that we've got some stuff to make yourself even smarter on this post call. We'll make that available to you. But let's look at what like the requirements are under 4.0 and what they said you got to do. And then we'll talk a little bit about how we can help you with it. Okay. So relevant requirements. You've got all these scripts. They're running. There's both first party and third party, and then even fourth party that you may not know. Scripts that are being called in, right, by the partners that you've allowed to be on the site. You got to know that they're there, and you got to confirm that they're authorized to be there, right? So the first thing is you got to maintain an inventory of all payment page scripts and justify why they're necessary, right? You got somebody in the organization that's got to look at it, confirm that it should be there, and authorize its use, right? And then what gets tricky is you have to ensure the integrity of each script. You have to make sure that nothing has happened, that that script has not been compromised, that, there's no changes occurring that could lead to the theft of PCI data. That includes monitoring payment headers to make sure that the adversary hasn't somehow done something to change that, and alerting and blocking on all malicious scripts that might be running on the payment page. So, effectively, you got to get eyes on this problem. You got to have conversation about why this stuff is there. You've got to continually manage an inventory to make sure you know it's there. You've got to make sure you've got a capability to prevent anything from doing, any adversary from doing anything wrong to compromise it. And then you've got to block any of those compromises. So very clear, very specific requirements underneath column 6.4 or element 6.4.3 and 11.6.1. So 6.4.3 and 11.6.1, a little bit of an amalgam between the two. 6.4.3 really, in our view, kind of deals with the visibility end of it. 11.6.1 really kind of deals with the protection end of it. But those of you that are on the call here, if you have a QSA, if you're a level 1 merchant, you can definitely talk to the QSA community. We've been working with like 200 of the world's QSACs, the firms that employ the QSAs themselves. Been educating on this for some number of months. I know this is top of the tongue for a lot of the folks in that auditing community. Ask your QSA if you have one, for any guidance on this. If you don't have one, and you have an ISA, then your internal resource should know about it. If you aren't there, if you're a level 2 or below, and you're typically used to doing like a SAC A, where you fill out your own security assessment questionnaire, we can definitely help you. We've got experts on staff that can help you really get your head around all things related to this. We'll take the time. We'll educate you. We'll educate members of your team, etc. Reach out. Source Defense believes in stopping this threat and solving this problem. And we are a PCI participating organization. So that means we've been working with a PCI council. We're on the small merchant task force. We've done all these things because we believe in helping the community. So if you don't have a QSA or you don't have somebody internal and you're struggling to understand this more, we're at your ready. Just give us a call and we'll talk to you more about it. But these elements, 6.4.3, 11.6.1, can be read and found in the PCI DSS 4.0 definition. Okay. So let's talk about like meeting and maintaining these requirements. Okay. You may look at the clock and you may say, okay, cool. Well, we have until March of 2025, to get this solved for. A few things there that you really need to understand. When you think about like solving this problem, it's going to take a little bit of time internal to get your head around it. As we understand through working through some higher education environments, there's not necessarily always a centralization of maybe the e-commerce streams, if you will, or the areas where revenues are collected. Your bookstore people, and your ticketing, and your donor people, and you name them, right? Tuition, all that. They may be different entities, so there's going to be some internal time frame to get the conversation going. We can speed along the process, but you're going to want to have these controls in place well before that timeline, that March timeline of next year, which means you want to get started soon. Because one of the things that, when we've been talking to the QSAs that are out there, that we've been engaged with, that they're going to want to see is that these controls were deployed, in place, and working, proof, evidence of working, prior to that date. So that means, a quarter's worth at minimum, of proof that you have, the right controls in place. So really, if you might look at it and you go, okay, well, it looks like it's about a year from now, you got about a 9-month window, to get things in place. And then if you go in any code freeze or anything like that, that window narrows even further, right? But, as the PCI Council does, they offer a variety of different solutions that are, ways to solve the problem. I think that what you'll find as you explore the issues a little bit further is that some of the guidance may get you compliant, but probably won't get you secure. Will be really, really cumbersome to build, deploy, manage, and won't really give you the same level of both effectiveness and ease of use of maybe just finding a commercial solution to market like us. And we have a couple of different white papers. I mentioned, the stuff that we'll throw in the chat window. There's new ones coming out that I think are really, really important to this conversation, specifically around the notion of the use of content security policy. So let me before I go too far, like there's some DIY solutions you can do, right? The council says you can look at the use of sub-resource integrity for script integrity. You can use content security policy for script behavior control. You're going to need to build some kind of workflow tool to track the authorization. You're going to need to build some kind of spreadsheet tool to deal with justification. You're not going to get alerting and you're not going to get blocking based on the use of those capabilities. And so, you're still kind of like hobbling things together in a way that's not really truly going to get you over the goal line. And it really is going to be cumbersome and difficult. The CSP side of things is one of the white papers that we'll have. Probably in the next week or two, we'll follow up with you on that. Not our words, but analysis by one of the world's largest, QSA firms, really looking at the use of CSP and its shortcomings. And so I really caution you against that as a focal point for how to solve the problem. And then, if you're like the rest of the world, and I know, you guys, you often are, you're probably resource constrained, you're budget constrained, et cetera. And there's solutions like Source Defense. There's others you can look at as well, where we can offer a real fast, easy, cost-effective, low burden, no stress kind of solution to the issue. So let's talk a little bit about what Source Defense does, and then I'll start getting into some questions here. Let's walk you through this thing, and we'll probably be done in about 5-6 minutes, and then we'll get into questions for the back half of the call. So what we do, okay, I mentioned at the top of the call, we're purpose-built to solve this eSkimming threat, right, to stop this problem. We have two types of solutions. We have a detection solution, and we have a protection solution. We're going through a little bit of like naming rechanges, but like limited and standard is what you might hear. Some people would be familiar with. And we also, kind of speak around the PCI versus site-wide is probably what you'll end up seeing, in the near term. But the detection solution is an outside looking in, no deployment required, scanning solution for your web properties. Okay, similar to what you might be familiar with your ASV requirements under PCI. Consider it like that, non-invasive, outside looking in, effectively emulating traffic to the site, and then, grabbing analysis on what's going on related to an inventory of all scripts, cataloging the sensitive data on your site, and then providing you with a monitoring solution and an alerting solution, but not a blocking solution to the problem. So you would get most of what you need to do under PCI with the detection solution, but you're going to have to integrate it into your current security operations. More alerts to manage, more things to respond to. Obviously, it's a little bit lower cost than a full-blown protective solution, so that maybe something you want to entertain, but it is going to mean a little bit more work on the back end of your end of things, right? On the protection side, it's a very, very non-heavy, a very lightweight kind of deployment, okay? Deployed as a few line of code. We effectively sandbox all the JavaScript that's running on your site, and we control the behaviors. So we have policy-based recommendations and rules that we throw out there that, comes shrink-wrapped, ready out of the box, right? And that can be customized, where we take a protection first kind of approach to this thing. We decide, and you help us decide, and we control what those scripts running on the site can and can't do. In a lot of ways, it's almost like an enabler. So if you want script running on the payment pages, you can have it, because we're buffering the payment page from the actual visibility into the data that's being captured, and we're not allowing the scripts running there to have access to that data. We're not allowing the scripts that run there to make any changes. So we thwart the attack automatically, and then also solve that data leakage problem that I had mentioned, right? So, that data leakage side where we're saying, great, if it's deployed here, like, no, Meta cannot have access to people's, PHI, right? So this quick primer on how it works. When you think about like what the benefits are on the digital and marketing end, basically we're then enabler. We're going to get, a brand reputation protection, protect the university, protect your university system, protect the profit margin so you can continue to use, these systems, but allow the security team to really have complete control over what third parties are doing on the site. We help you enable the marketing side and the business side, continually enhance the user experience without security concerns or data privacy concerns. Get that full inventory of what vendors are on your site and help you, like deploy in the same way that you would, with other types of solutions. Similar cost to other solutions you already have on your site, right? So, very, very low cost kind of approach. Something that like marketing could even undertake as an expense if you can't find the budget for the solution and security. But obviously with the mandate, it probably becomes a security budgeted line item. On the security end of things, if you've got a third-party risk management effort underway, consider us a core part of that. And so there may be some ways to talk about those third-party risk management projects and budgets, to get after the deployment here. We effectively help you close off a major third-party risk, one that's, in your most critical business channel, like online and the gathering of, revenues from the online actions. Right now, you're giving 100% trust to the partners on your website. You're not managing or controlling any of the code that's running there. We stop that. We help you round out WebSec with a focus on this new attack vector. Again, the client side, the data point of input. And, we help with the supporting your overall comprehensive security monitoring goals and minimizing cyber risk, right? On the data privacy side, we don't let the third parties, do things without you knowing that they're doing them. Full control, full visibility, verification of the purpose, control their actions. We've got these policy controls that come out of the box. We can either implement them based upon the compliance requirement and mandate that you're focused on, or we can help you customize. The assessment and review process. This is one thing that's very important, especially as you deal with PCI and handing over data to your QSA and that proof of control efficacy that's required underneath the standard. We've got the ability to give you all of that in a nice shrink wrapped, kind of way. And then again, help you touch on multiple things like PCI, CCPA, HIPAA, GDPR, FFIEC, et cetera. So there's a dashboard, and I've got some questions already coming at me I want to answer. So I'll just give you a real quick rundown. There's a dashboard that we have built. It's a free solution, a freeware solution that gets you started and can get you visibility into the issue and help you start the conversation and get you on that roadmap to your project. Okay. And I really ask you to consider availing yourself of it. It's out there where effectively we're giving you the beginning stages, right, into the overall management side of things. So they say you have to have a script inventory. We'll use, and again, this is kind of taking our detection approach as an outside looking in, freeware solution. We'll do an external scan. We'll give you an inventory result. We'll let you know what we've seen in the inventory, a full deep dive view into the inventory tree, what third parties are there, what fourth parties are there, even like a definition of what the scripts are, who the partners are, what they're designed for. We're going to give you the ability to see, as I mentioned multiple times, the fourth, fifth, nth parties there, which is a requirement under PCI. You got to know all the scripts, not just the ones you enabled to be on the site. We're going to allow you to do justification and track justification. So in this case, what's demonstrated is, we found 18 scripts. Only 15 of them, only 3 of them have been justified. You got work to do on the 15. We're going to do scanning out of the gates. It's like for the first 90 days, we're going to do it weekly. Obviously, like we can't continue to, undertake such cost with all of the folks that we're working with on this thing. So we got to scale it back at some point. After 90 days, you got to upgrade. And then, we'll give you the alerts, but we will not do the blocking. And as I mentioned, under the paid solution or underneath the protective solution, the blocking is built in. But this is a really good way to get the conversation started, this freeware solution. A lot of QSA firms are using it. We actually offer a similar dashboard for the QSA. So if you are working with a QSA, you can both have visibility into it, kind of help you with like that ongoing management. And that's a really good way to kind of get the organization, at the university, or within your system moving, towards solving the problem in a more permanent fashion. So there's a QR code right there. Have a look at that, scan it, download, kind of a no strings attached kind of situation. And now I've been talking really fast to try and stay on track. Let me get to a couple of questions, but first I'm going to take a sip of water. Okay. For 643 and 1161, our QSAs confirmed that they apply for iframes, but not for full redirects to the payment processor page. Do you agree with this? No, we do not. And in fact, I think that that's a conversation that a lot of QSAs are having, and that I think most are coming to the conclusion that that statement's not accurate. And let me break that down. So what the question is that, in most cases, like you may have just like an iframe deployed, right? On the page that then, is going to support the e-commerce side of things, right? That web page, that page that starts off that includes an iframe, or in the case of this, the other side of the question, the full redirect to a payment processor, that page still has to be controlled and managed. Even if you're handing it off to the payment processor, the standard says that you have to control the page effectively. That's like your part of the ownership in the online checkout process. And if you think about like the capabilities that we discussed of malware that is designed for this eSkimming threat, it makes a lot of sense as to why. So let's say you got a button on your web page, right? And that button, you are now leaving, acmeu, .edu and going to our payment processor. If there's scripts running on that page, whether first party or third party, that can be compromised or that have been compromised, I, as the adversary, can actually control where that button link goes to. I can change the URL. So I can redirect them, to like badguy.com where I'm stealing all the credit card information. Okay. So you've got to control your end of the equation, whether or not you're handing it off and there's a fully outsourced, e-commerce engine on the right-hand side of that click. You've still got to control and be able to provide inventory, provide justification, provide documentation, the header monitoring, all those things that we've talked about still have to be done on your end of the website. Okay. There's another part of the conversation, which is related to what the standard is actually getting at. They use the word pages, but really, ultimately, what they're talking about is payment flows. And we've got another white paper that's coming out very soon. Again, not our thinking, but a very, very, world-renowned QSA, or QSAC, I should say, that looks at payment flows versus payment pages. Because again, where does the payment process start? If it's upstream in your website that somebody is going to select product or select, in your case, right? Well, let's use online bookstore, right? My kid's going to university right now. She's going online. She's going to go to checkout. She's going through that whole process. Before she even puts things in the shopping cart, an adversary can control, the redirection or the addition, in some cases, the presentation of forms that you didn't even design into the website to steal the data. And so it's really becoming more and more of a site-wide, kind of protection, kind of in scope, than maybe what most people would think when they first started reading the standard. And this happens, a lot with PCI, right? It starts with, sort of what is it intended, and then it like as it gets more and more into the bloodstream and more conversation happens, you start to expand a little bit, the thinking about what actually is required. And that's how most QSAs think. So I hope that answered your question. And definitely, like, if you want to ask a follow on, if anything I said there was kind of jumbled or all over the place, let me know. But that is a conversation that we get a lot. And it's a conversation, as I mentioned in that PCI Dream Team webinar, they really take head on. And so you might want to take a look at that. We'll follow up with that. But yeah, so your web page, if it's got that button redirecting to that payment processor, you got to control the scripts on that web page. Okay. See if there's any other coming in here. I got a little flags here for chat and Q&A. Okay. Chat. Let's see. All right. Anybody else got anything in the world of questions that I did not address? Looks like my colleague Scott has thrown out a link to the freeware, as well as a link to that first Research report that I mentioned we're going to follow up with the recording of this. We will do so. But yeah, there's a lot of other resources. Scott, if you could maybe put the link to the PCI resources page, that might be helpful. And then what we'll do is some of these other things that have come online or will be coming online soon, we'll follow up with those as well for further education. Let's see, any other questions before we start wrapping up? Does not sound like it. Okay, well, I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your schedule today. I know I was talking kind of fast. Hopefully it came across. Hopefully you guys, got a little bit more like education on this. Any questions, as I mentioned, feel free to follow up with me. I'm just Steve at Source Defense. I'll put that in the chat right now. Steve at sourcedefense.com. And then we're here to help. So either talk to your QSA, like I mentioned, or reach out to us. We're happy to help. And good luck out there and hope to talk to you soon. Appreciate you.